getting to a pretty good number, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through our dialogue today and that we also have time for questions. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Jennifer Graham. I'm with MillerKnoll, and I want to welcome you to today's edition of MillerKnoll's Design Perspectives. In its second year, MillerKnoll's Leader to Leader program brought together 30 design leads from A&D firms across North America for a 3-day summit in March. In conversations, participants were asked to engage in discussion to address key challenges affecting the future of the design industry. Today, you're invited to join in the conversation with several of these leads as they share their thoughts on how to design with greater impact from the perspective of well-being, connection, and change. We will explore opportunities for the design industry across those 3 areas and beyond. Joseph White, our Director of Design Strategy, will lead this dialogue, and we encourage you to participate by offering your insight and your questions within the chat. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to you, Joseph, to introduce our panel. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. So as Jennifer was saying, every year in the Leader to Leader program, we assemble a new group of forward thinkers and change makers in the field of design. And we gather to share ideas and learn from each other's experience and gain new insight to drive our daily practice. And we're honored to have 4 of those attendees with us here today. We have Katy Mercer from Woods Bagot, Erin Wong from Interior Architects, Alexis Kim from SmithGroup, and Edin Rudić from MKDA. But I think it's safe to say that all of us on this call here today believe that design can help people navigate change and quite literally give structure and shape to the future we want. To give structure to the workshop portion of this year's Leader to Leader event, we identified 3 key concepts organized under the theme Purpose of Place. And I'll introduce those themes in a moment and ask each of our panelists to help unpack them. But today, as Jennifer mentioned, we also want to include you in that dialogue. So as you listen, think about how the concepts are showing up in your own world, both in your firms and in your clients' organizations, the clients that you're doing design work for. Think about how the insights shared by our panelists might play out differently in different regions or market sectors. And when questions arise for you, please post them in the chat and we'll pull them into the live conversation. Okay, so now let's start unpacking the theme Purpose of Place. From MillerKnoll's research, collaborations with external partners, and conversations with our clients around the globe, we found that organizations everywhere are prioritizing 3 key areas of impact: well-being, connection, and change. We added a 4th discussion group focused on future opportunities in the design industry that weren't expressly covered by the other 3 themes. So let's get into it. Katy, we defined well-being as a person's perception of their physical, psychological, and social conditions. And at the conference, we talked about how hospitality as a fundamentally human and place-based exchange can help impact well-being. Would you share with us some of the things that were discussed relative to well-being and some of your own thoughts that have popped up since the event?
Absolutely. I'm excited I get to talk about the well-being aspect of it. It was a great breakout session. But I think before the session, we heard from Dr. Michelle Osman around what you just mentioned, Joseph, the hospitality for supporting well-being, and really hospitality as a spatial concept around kind of hosting versus being a guest, and relationship-based hospitality, which I found to be really, really interesting. 3 kind of key takeaways from that were around protection. You mentioned physical and psychological safety and security is kind of what one of them. Intellectual welcome. I loved the idea around inclusive design and a space for people to really be who they are and understand a sense of belonging. And then the open table, where there was cross-level collaboration and really the power of a shared meal, were kind of 3 of the main ways of thinking around relationship-based hospitality, which then in our breakout session, I think was really applicable, because one of the key takeaways from that, and we had about 5, was using hospitality design for culture and belonging, and thinking about a space can host and how people are welcomed into a space. We talk a lot right now around not only the welcome, but also the goodbye. How somebody's welcomed into a space is equally as important as how they're left and how they leave the space. And in general, the idea of hospitality is coming up more and more and more, and I feel like it's becoming a tagline for anything and everything to just feel like a hotel. But I actually don't think that's what it's about so much. It's really about these principles. and it's about taking care of people and making them feel like they're cared for. And so one of the other things that came out of our supporting well-being was really kind of rethinking the whole entire purpose of the workplace. You know, people's lives are incredibly intertwined with all kinds of other things that are challenging. The notion of even being at a workplace, with hobbies, with their health, with all kinds of other things, with their families. So they want to rebalance and be more present at work. And this challenge is, you know, specific, I think, to employers to really make workplace something that has value. And then when they're making space, that there's time to find space for actual well-being, and that, you know, allows the individual to have a sense of choice, whether they need to have heads down work, or whether they need to have respite, or whether they need to be collaborative, all the kinds of things we've been talking about for years, but seems to be more and more important now that there's a real sense of choice for the individual working model. And then, you know, making sure that we're prioritizing people's autonomy, you know, giving them the freedom to choose how, when, where they work at any given time. So not only are we giving them choice in the workplace around how to do the activities, but also making sure that we're giving them the freedom to focus on well-being if they need to, and rebalance themselves when it comes to being present at work. And how are we creating space for that breathing room? And then also the last one, I think, was around challenging just office use standards. The term standards, I think, is a terrible word, you know, and I think we can all sort of agree. And so I think that's why we're flexing totally on the other side now around the hospitality, where it's really, really layered and experiential. So, you know, the idea of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week is totally antiquated. And so how are we really challenging the idea of what the office's purpose is, and should it always be filled? And is that really the new model? And that's the main thing.
Hey, that's a really great overview. Shifting gears a little bit, Aaron, we defined connection as a network of in-person, virtual, and abstract relationships between people, places, ideas, and things. And we talked about how to engage the diversity of perspectives with a special focus on business resource groups, employee resource groups, or other affinity groups within an organization to help drive connection. So I was wondering if you would share with us some of the things that you heard in your breakout group discussion, and some of the thoughts that you've had since around this concept of connection.
Yeah, we did have, it was a great discussion. It probably could have went on forever. And I also felt like a lot of the topics were woven with other topics. So it seems like we ended up touching a broader perspective. But the key takeaways for me was that notion. The first notion was that remote work, in essence, is disconnecting us, and how can we reconnect with this hybrid work scenario? I think it was generally agreed that the hybrid work scenario, whatever form it is, whether it's 3 days a week, or whether it's, everybody comes, people only come in whatever days they do, and so that notion is always going to be different. But the idea that senior people, leadership, look at the workplace differently in terms of what it should be doing versus younger staff in terms of what they want to get out of that work environment. And I feel like that conversation will continue to go on. I do feel like leadership in a case of the notion of wanting to connect that divide really needs to take a stronger role in being able to offer some options to the younger staff in regards to how we could work together to be able to give them what they want in the work environment. The second topic that came up that was really interesting to me was this idea that clients believe that if you build it, they will come, right? That whole notion of, if I give them free lunch and I give them a gym and all these kinds of amenities, they're going to come back to the office. And I think our experiences as designers working on projects that used to provide those kinds of amenities in the work environment have found that that's not necessarily the case. And I've experienced projects now where the amenities are different. I've talked to clients in that regard and asked them, what is it that they are finding And I actually experienced this ourselves. And that notion is that there's a concept there that people actually are the amenity. And that idea that if you exposed to bright minds and an opportunity to learn in the office, that in essence can be more powerful amenity than a game room or even free lunch. That if I can come into the office and learn something or have an opportunity to meet somebody, a speaker or even people in our internal leadership that can offer something different way of thinking, I feel like that will in essence become the new amenity, if you will. The third topic was this whole notion of traditional mentorship, that idea that senior people mentor young staff. And how's that working now? If you think about it, that's not the case. I feel like the idea of being able to sort of relook at that whole notion that our younger staff can mentor senior people as well. They have different life experiences. They come from different cultures, and the idea that learning and mentoring goes both ways. I do believe, knowing some of the younger staff, at least in our office, that there's a different perspective about their voice, and I feel like for senior staff, being able to make space for these young voices is going to be really important. And the idea of helping them build their skills so they can advocate for themselves and be able to be one of those leaders, that they become an amenity in that sense. And I feel like that piece is something that I'm really interested in and want to work towards. The last notion was this idea of DEI initiatives, and the idea that these kinds of initiatives needs to be embedded into all companies, all workplaces as well. And it's interesting, more specifically, our design teams, that I want to build design teams that are as diverse as my client's design team. I recently went through an exercise. Well, I feel like I have a fairly diverse team working on a particular project. And I noticed immediately that the client also had as diverse a team. And it was a really fantastic connection, because in a sense, they told us things that didn't work for them based on different cultures, different diversities that we weren't in tune to, because we start to draw from our typical tools of design, and we realized that we needed a new tool bag. And I felt like that in and of itself was a very powerful connection with our client.
Great thoughts there. I love that notion of people as the amenity. So moving on, covering across our topics, and then we're all going to come back together and just have an open-ranging discussion about each of these. Alexis, we described change as becoming something different or modifying the way things are, and acknowledged that change is always relative to a starting condition, and it's often variable in how it impacts different individuals, groups, and communities. We also talked a lot about how place, like the design of physical place, can be a corollary to change or help people navigate change. So would you share some of the things that you heard and thought about in the group discussion on change, and maybe some ideas that have come to light for you since?
Sure. So for someone, to be honest, who often leads change management for client, I thought this was kind of a fitting topic for me personally. We started out our discussion, I think, to first recognizing that there are a lot of and many constant changes that we've gone through since the pandemic, but also recognizing the pace of that change is also getting even faster. It's probably not going to slow down. So within that kind of dynamic, how do we actually facilitate change? And many of the aspects actually evolved around how we facilitate that change within our own profession, but I think it can be applicable to any organization. One theme was around really importance of being fully present to listen, to be able to learn and to be able to then have an open mindset to change. I think it was Vince from Texas that joined us, talked about how, initial moment of listening isn't always understanding. That when you're fully present, you can really get an understanding of what's really happening and understand each other. The second theme was similar to what Erin just said about kind of the mentorship model. How do we flip the script to really facilitate intergenerational learning? I think we tend to, as designers, focus a lot on the next generation, Gen Z, Y, the alphas. But I think it's important that we are in a rare moment in a modern history that we have, I think, up to 5 different generations that are represented within an organization. So how do we actually stitch those relationships and learnings and experiences together? Just as important for me to learn from the younger generation as the more experienced person. The third theme was around really learning to pivot constantly is a learned practice. Practice makes perfect. Even though we've gone through a lot of changes to the pandemic, we probably did it kind of haphazardly. So how do we do that intentionally? It means sometimes I think witnessing how our different teammates navigate pivoting, whether it's during the process of design or interacting with your teammates, witnessing those things firsthand is really meaningful, and you can learn better and faster. And then the last theme that we came away was that is really we need to create space to honor your work at an individual level, at a team level, at an organizational level, that while all of these changes are happening so rapidly, that we have to sort of pause and celebrate the success just as much as mourning what I call typically sort of the seasonal change that happens, right? That happens within a project. Sometimes the projects might be paused or canceled, and even sort of taking time to honor that was important. So these were kind of 4 themes, but you could argue that, yes, very applicable in our own profession to really enhance those experiences, but I think it can be more broadly applied to any organization. To me personally, I think facilitating change in this really current landscape of work it's very dynamic, means to really put focus on the people. I think even what Katy and Erin mentioned, even people as amenity, we want to talk about the place, but we can't talk about the place without talking about the people and what we want to enhance within them, right? And I think that's an important aspect and a key takeaway that I continue to sort of think about.
Thank you very much for that recap. So just a quick plug before shifting to Edin, who's going to take us home on the future opportunities category. Those of you on the line, anyone else out there who's offering change management services, been involved in mentoring exercises, exploring ideas of hospitality, let us know how this is showing up or any questions that you might want to pose to the group as we dive into our open discussion here in just a few moments. But before that, Edin, bring us home with this topic of other future opportunities, this kind of vague and open wildcard slot. What were some of the things that showed up in your group's conversation, and what are some of the things that you've thought about since then?
Yeah, I think like most of this. Hi, everyone. I'm Edin Rudić. I'm Executive Creative Director at MKDA New York. So some of those findings are going to be a little bit more biased based on New York and kind of a workplace mostly. But yeah, so the topic was the future opportunities in design industry. And I think like the answers are for the most part covered with the previous 3 topics. So I'm not going to go into that, but I'll open some other questions. I think that we are facing a new set of challenges in the design industry, and in order to like address them, we kind of have to identify those questions and ask ourselves the right questions. And I'm just going to put a few things that are going to start percolating in your heads, like it's the elephant in the room, future of the workplace. When we meet the clients, usually they ask us like, so what's the future of the workplace? Are we going to work from home, remote? Like, what is this like flexible hybrid work environment? Because they want to know like how much of the square footage they'll need. Are they going to save some space with that? And there's no really right answer. I mean, what we do usually, we try to identify these the type of the company their base, like hierarchy-based company, which is like academia, government, medical, legal, team-based, something that companies that need collaboration, like design firms and marketing firms, ad hoc technology and market-based, like finance and broker sales, other services. So we realized that like kind of putting the set of rules, what would work for them in the work environment, is not necessarily the best idea based on their kind of DNA. One size does not fit all, so we try to identify like individuals in all these companies that can actually work remotely, work from home, or kind of having a hybrid environment, and kind of find the people who are coming to the office and try to attract them. Just like in our office, we have like people that are designers and architects, and we kind of need to be together in the office, but there's some people like in accounting that can be actually working remotely. So for them, it's not necessary to be in the office. So we realized that we're trying to provide the incentive for them to come to the office for those who need to be here. And just like yesterday, we were talking to a client and they said, like, we're probably going to be like 5 days a week. Like, we're going to give everybody who's here 5 days a week assigned desk. So that's one of the incentives. Second thing was accommodating needs of the new generation. We kind of discussed it at our March meeting, but we have Gen Z now and Gen Alpha in the workplace. Not Gen Alpha yet, but soon, in like 5-6 years, we're going to start getting interns. And we know what happened to millennials with the open work environment and kind of collaborative. These people are now a little bit older. They want more offices. They want like a aged whiskey and oak bars. So accommodating generation, starting everything from scratch is not necessarily going to work. So I think that the balancing those needs of different generations, as we talked, is going to be the key point. So you need some offices, you need some collaborative spaces, you'll need some beanbags, not in the legal department, legal offices, but you need some of those things that will bring people together from different generations. My nephew, as I usually say, he spent his Gen Z. He spent all of his life like doing the homework and on the beanbags and on the couch. But today it's like he's coming to the workplace and he kind of feels sterile in a work environment. So just coming back to Alexis and Katy and Aaron, like, we need to engage these generations in the proper way. I have another topic, which is this engagement of the people in the office. I mean, like, work from home kind of brings new challenges to us. And one of them is like people not being fully engaged. I can just talk for our industry. People working from home don't engage in after work activities as much. There's a lost sense of community. So providing these amenities like kegerators and pizza parties that used to be popular 10 years ago and gyms and other things don't work anymore. People want to be in the office 9 to 5 and leave. And another elephant in the room is also like that contributes to that disengagement is the kind of geopolitical crisis in the world. Like, I think everybody's affected with war in Europe and war in Middle East and everything that's happening in US with politics. So like combined with the COVID, I think people are feeling that they want to stay home and kind of feel safe and kind of secured and they want a comfort of that. So I think that uncertainty that affects us all, like, we have to find a way to find that comfort and safe place in a workplace. And how can we bring the feeling of stability and safety, community, and belonging at the workplace? And the last thing is engage in a work, engage in the work in nature, field trips like we are doing in our office, for instance. We try to engage people by providing educational field trips to like art places or nature and other things, historical sites that kind of inspire people and kind of bring them together. It gives them kind of, it feels like this new generation and even lots Gen X and baby boomers are kind of losing a purpose. So we want to try to bring that feeling of that we matter, our design matters, and kind of inspire people to come to the office and share their experiences. I know this is like, I'm going to finish with this, it's going to be quick, but I think I would open this conversation to like a broader conversation with some other experts in the field, like psychologists and scientists and business people and artists, experts who can help us like understand the needs of the people today, so we can kind of address the right issues.
Thank you. Well, I think we've set a really broad platform and foundation for this discussion on this broader idea of purpose of place. And, you know, so I think if we kind of pause for a moment and reflect on what the assumed purpose of place may have been prior to this extended season of change that we've been working through, versus what a new intentional purpose of place might be, or many purposes of place. Alexis, you graciously agreed to wade into these uncharted waters with us and share some of your initial thoughts on this broader idea of purpose of place.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short, but I did kind of go down the rabbit hole a little bit when thinking about sort of the purpose of a place, that this theme. So of course, where do we start? I started Googling actually what is the definition of a place. And incidentally, it's interesting because it first says it's a particular region or center of population or location, but it also goes on to say that it is building, space, or location that is set apart or used for a specific purpose, which I thought was interesting. And when I look up definition of the purpose itself, it is really the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists, aiming at, I think, objective and intentions, right? And I think we as designers are looking for what is a new purpose of a place now that seems to be very multifaceted, and we're asking the right questions. And I think that's important to the people as well. It used to be, I think, designing a place, particularly a place of work, was much simpler in some ways, often because we sort of kind of look through the lens of creating a space to work, for work, to allow work to happen, whether albeit it's beautiful, comfortable, or functional, or even productive, but oftentimes I would argue also driven by efficiency, right? But now it's a lot more complicated because that we're challenged with the fact that that space is now many spaces. It's multifaceted, multidimensional, physical and virtual, or digital for that matter. So I think we have to kind of force ourselves to pivot to create a place that supports meaning and reason. So rather than thinking about just about the what of the design, but the why. And I think even in our prep call, we talked about, you know, many organizations the answers might be different. So, you know, if an organization, I know we can go down another rabbit hole about the hybrid work, but even that hybrid work model can be, you know, varying and vastly different. So organizations that are much more digital first or fully distributed, purpose of their place when they come together, whether it's quarterly or monthly, may be very different. It might be around building social capital across organization, or people finding their tribes, if you would, right? Whereas, you know, organization like SmithGroup, we actually just started to kind of create a more synchronized and structured hybrid, which means we have core days, we come together intentionally. So then the purpose of the place in this case, in our case, is also different meaning. It's to really create more intentional, deep collaboration when we come together. You know, how do we make sure that when people show up, like I chose this space in our office because this was really purposeful for this call, for me to connect with the audience. And it was really well thought out because there was a design element, right? So really ensuring that hospitality aspect that Katy talked about is really infused. So I think there are kind of wide ranges of answers, but I think fundamentally, how can we approach this question with, you know, by asking the question of why? I often think of sort of, there's a difference between home and a house. A house, house has a meaning and a purpose, and becomes a place because the purpose is given to it by the people that reside in it. And I think that's what we should kind of sort of challenge ourselves about. And I'm curious how others are actually thinking about in that term when they show up to the office, and how they can actually make that experience better.
Oh my God, I love that. The place has a purpose because of the meaning that the people ascribe to it.
And the meanings can be varied, right? As we all just talked about, lots of different categories and themes.
And as you said, they can change over time. So Edin, Katy, Aaron, jump in here.
I
What are
love
your
that.
thoughts on this?
I think that's fantastic. Actually, the question is why? Why do people actually? I'm just gonna like move it to another direction. Why do people feel comfortable at home? And it's not like right or wrong. They just feel comfortable because I was one of the reasons I was saying early. It's because of like uncertainty. It started with COVID partially, and people kind of reevaluated their thoughts and ideas and meaning of life and family and things that they're important in their life. And that kind of started this whole thing. And then now, I mean, we are living in a really tough, you can put your head in the sand, but we're all affected by what's happening in the world. And sometimes it feels like, oh my God, it's so frivolous for us to like select the white paint. Is this white or that white when, like half of the world is on fire? I mean, we lost like 20 cities in Ukraine and or like just drinking from the paper straw, when they're burning cities, and like we're not going to save the world by using the paper straw. So like it's hard to like put the things in perspective sometimes, and it's hard to kind of prioritize. We cannot go mad and just think about those things. But I think the reason why people are at home because they feel comfortable, they have safety net, they feel stable there. And again, like, why are they doing that? And how do we, the answer is probably finding the elements at the workplace or any place that provide those kind of elements, like comfort and sense of belonging, sense of community. And we talked about it in our earlier discussion, like about the city centers and how those city centers have to be reactivated and with community and art and other things. It is important to kind of bring that element. There's people are coming to the cities because cities existed for many centuries, and there's a reason why, because we can rub off of each other's ideas and kind of like see how everybody else is doing and kind of copy each other. And there's a reason why there's cities and communities. We are social creatures, and I think it's important to come to the office and the cities in general, like in the large gatherings, to exchange idea kind of and feel like we belong there.
So
it's a notion of the common going to a place where you believe everybody has the same common goals, right? I liken it, and everybody's general big picture goal should be the same. And I'll use our design firms as an example, is that we're going to go there and we're going to produce good work, right? And the idea is that we're going to produce good work, but we have these specialists. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym and there's so many, everybody's going there with the same goal, where they want to exercise and be fit, right? So, but on the flip side, not everybody's doing the same thing, right? There's some people doing cardio, there's some people lifting weights, there's some people doing Pilates, and there's a little yoga studio there. So everybody has different activities that they do, but the common good, the common goal is the same thing. I feel
that's powerful, but I'm curious. Let's do a check-in. Those of you on the panel, those of you online, do you think in workplace in general, is that common goal understood? Do you think people are showing up to the office with a common understanding of what they're trying to achieve?
I think it depends. I think a lot of companies potentially are having their own existential crises over what and how to do work. And so, and whether it's productivity, whether it is innovation, like you name it, right? And I think the old constructs that we may have had are getting tested. The idea of the togetherness, I think, is really interesting, that if you're going to come, you're probably coming because you want to be with other people, ideally towards a common goal. Maybe that is confusing at times, but let's say that it's not. Then that togetherness, I think, is where people feel like they belong to the kind of tribeness of the work in a way, whatever it might be, whether it could be nursing, it could be a firehouse, it could be design, it could be Wall Street, I don't know, right? But in a sense, there's an energy in everybody around you, maybe doing something similar or perhaps doing it better than you. And that is interesting, and so that when we were talking a little bit about hospitality, I love the tribeness too, around kind of ways to feel that you belong, is because there's a little bit of like ceremony in like the work that you're doing too, and like the like you're contributing this way and I'm contributing this way, and that means we're all going somewhere, and that could be just whatever the field may be. And I think that has the purpose that the people have given the meaning to, and I don't know that it necessarily needs to be within the time frames or the hours or the days or any of that it used to be. I think it can absolutely be a forum and a platform for doing collective great work at any scale, size, shape, or typology.
I think also that you're right. I think that people also get disengaged because they don't spend enough time, especially the younger ones who are starting to work. I mean, like when you come, you're right. When you come to a workplace, first of all, you have to dress up and come to work. You know, you feel better when you are wearing clothing and look good. And you some traditional rituals. There's tradition to it, like of the office work, and people kind of like the younger ones have to learn those things, and that's how you start gonna feel like you belong to that society. I think engagement is very important when it comes to bringing people together. And how do you incentivize people to come in? You know, like another topic.
That's fascinating. You know, it's like this notion of dress as a form of communication, and you know, I can imagine that's not something that's given. You know, like a shirt and tie in one context is required for entry, and in another, it's going to make you stick out and very much not belong. You know, so I think that the fact that that's very much open to interpretation is really great. I'm curious if any of y'all have thoughts around how the design of physical place could show up in a conversation like that, you know, either to enable some of these discussions, Katy, like you were mentioning around the what and the how to do work. You know, how can we use workplace planning, place design, the physical environment to kind of facilitate some of this connection and dialogue around, you know, alignment towards culture? Are there any things coming to mind for you there? I know we're going a little off script here, but
Actually, Joseph, I think one of my favorite quote from the trip was actually from Charles Eames, talking about kind of designer's role is really to anticipate, to be a good host, the needs of the guest. And, you know, it really made me think about, I think that's what we're, you know, that's what we somehow kind of lost track of doing, because we just think about the physical place, not the people in it, right? So if we're creating environments and how elevate the expectation of what that environment should be, one, how is it representing culture? I know it cannot create culture. We know that physical environment alone cannot build trust, for example, right? But we also know that it can be a deterrent. We know that it can actually enable and elevate the experiences in a way that generic spaces cannot. For example, you know, I know many clients that are trying to kind of bring people back to the office, to the same old cubicles and sterile environment, albeit maybe they had fancy coffee machines and cafes. You know, that's not where the experiences can happen, or the mentorship or wanting to connect with others can happen naturally, right? So design does matter to actually speak to how you want to set the tone about that culture. You know, we talked about kind of, is there a kind of greater good that do people understand? I think in the chat, I think there's a lot of comments about, it's really about messaging. But to me, how people connect to the greater organization starts from the bottom up. At an individual level, am I empowered to actually thrive, not just do the work, right? Not just do the job on a daily basis, but I'm actually thriving because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I am feeling I'm seen and I'm heard and I'm contributing. So the more you get exposure to that, the greater kind of good becomes part of the formula. It's really, to me, the greater good is the result. It's not the driver, because we want to kind of do better work and be all high performing, then the organization becomes a high performing organization in my mind, right? When we talk about kind of social capital, one reason why I love that aspect, when we coming back to the office for SmithGroup, we talked about how organizations with every individual having much stronger social capital is creates a stronger culture, and that's actually it's found through the study. That means my social network has to be both sort of lateral. I have network laterally, but also people more experienced than me just as much as people less experienced than me. This sort of full circle of creating that network for every single individual. So how do we enhance that from design perspective? I'll just kind of pause there.
There is a good comment here about mutual accountability that someone had popped in, to the degree of awareness do people have over their work and how it impacts other people's work. How well does the culture support the idea of mutual accountability? I do valuable work and it matters to others. And it's a little bit of kind of what you're talking about here.
Can I add just one more thing? Like, we are designers, and it's kind of not, we are not experts in our clients' cultures. We are providing, we are like basically, if you look at the client as being a plant, we are providing the planter, soil, water, and sunlight and light to grow the plant. But it really, it's up to a plant itself as well. So that culture that client has built, or they don't have developed culture, is something that I think would be a broader discussion with some other experts. As designers, we have to, like in our visioning sessions, we have to establish that foundation of understanding the culture of the space and how they see themselves and how they want to work. And we can kind of like, we can execute it in our design. But I think the greater question is really that we need like to speak to other professionals, psychologists, sociologists, professionals, other professionals like businessmen and financial people and other medical workers, artists, and community, to kind of understand really how to like build that culture. It's like, again, as designers, we are providing the planter, but I think this has to be discussed. We cannot really like force or build a culture for a client in a space where it doesn't exist necessarily. There's some brands and there's some clients who really are like just corporate, and you're trying to like to extract as much as you can from them, but it's really not developed. I think it's a discussion for broader kind of experts meeting like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. Bringing in other areas of expertise and collaborating to kind of build something new. In your example of the plant and the planter, as being a bit of a houseplant nerd myself, knowing that there is a broad range of different types of planters, in terms of whether your pot is glazed or terracotta, is it self-watering, is it perforated to allow for airflow? They're like all of these like specialized things. The more I would say like the more interesting and specialized the plant, the more specialized the planter, to support its growth.
I think what I just heard is that we need a consultant to pick the soil.
Well, I mean,
at least
I think that's what I heard, right? And I think that's right, because I find our profession, I feel in the past, being a really good designer was all it took, right? It was a pretty, you could almost bracket that. Now we're talking about strategies, we're talking about psychology, we're talking about, understanding culture from somebody, else that you got like 2 hours to understand their culture, and you got like 3 weeks to come up with design. It's a lot to ask for. I feel like our profession that used to be very specific about arbitrating taste has become so much wider now that we have to become educated in a lot of other things. I do feel that pressure, that challenge.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
something that I've been using a lot lately, or a statement I've been using a lot lately, is that as, place design practitioners, we have the knowledge and expertise to create a place to do pretty much anything. But if we can't, or if our clients can't articulate what that place needs to do, that's a very risky proposition in terms of creating a successful result. I'm curious if those of you, the panelists on screen, or any folks online, have started to really explore this idea of cross-functional expertise within your firms. Are you bringing on new roles that haven't existed previously, or are there new external partners that you're collaborating with in fields like neuroscience, environmental psychology, sociology, things like that? Are these things that you're digging into in any way? Or is this a new area of development for the design industry?
I think just personally, because I'm practiced more on the front end, working with client, doing strategy, we do really emphasize sort of broadening the expertise beyond just design and creativity. So I mean, at SmithGroup, we actually have data analysts, not just analysts, but data scientists, for example, because a lot of things are data driven nowadays, right? But they're, to me, very hard numbers and finite. But a lot of these things that we talk about, they're all fluffy and what I call squishy data. In more qualitative things, how do you still fold those in? And to me, that's where, one of my teammates actually has psychology background, and that's important. I know when we met in LA, we listened to, Suchi and Susan about sort of neuroaesthetics. It's really proven that there's proof in design having power to influence and move emotions and change our brain dynamic, right? I think the more we can kind of educate ourselves, we don't have to be the expert, but I think we have to learn to ask the right questions to our client and be curious and help them be curious about these other things that might potentially have greater impact than what we used to think. I mean, ultimately, design to me stitches all of these spaces and purpose together to create a place, and that should include, high quality. I mean, we used to say, is your space Instagram worthy, right? But how do you give it more meaning than that? That's when we can actually, come to the table. And opening the dialogue about even things that we don't know about, but aware of what should be discussed, such as health and safety, psychological boundaries, and those things that we all talked about as different topics. So, yeah, I'm a huge advocate for including even sociologists, anthropologists.
I think that's great. Maybe in our visioning session and workplace strategy, for instance, we can come up with a new questionnaire that's not just direct, quantifying the amount of spaces and just generic culture questions, but really kind of getting into more specific things for the clients to think about before we actually meet, and kind of explore and give them some examples of that and explore ahead of time, so we can kind of build a stronger foundation for our design. Because you don't want to bring game room into a law firm that has billable hours. That's all the amenities now, but something that's meaningful and culturally interesting for the client. So I think, yeah, building a new questionnaire in the visioning session is a great idea.
Katy, yeah, please.
On the flip side of this is interesting. So a lot around neurodiversity is happening. And being included in design, and I think it's wonderful. More recently, I've come across 2 or 3 times where airports are creating sensory rooms now, and it's wonderful. What an incredible new piece of the program. What's interesting though is when it comes to kind of cross-functional inputs and lots of different people giving inputs towards what a room like that should do. A room is even a funny idea of this, but let's just say. And then it became death by too many inputs. It actually, I think, for a couple different reasons became, and I've seen this now a couple times, not only for our practice, but for other practices, that it's too many inputs, and then everybody's checking a box on a responsibility towards reacting to those inputs, because nobody kind of knows the exact way to navigate which ones are applicable, which ones aren't. So it's kind of for all, which is lovely, but then for all, no one size fits all. Then you have too many things. So the room tried to do like 50 things, and therefore to me was unsuccessful in all of them, because it was so programmatically challenging to sort of say, this is what you do if you're this type of person who has this particular issue or thing. And so I find that we can also at the same exact time be paralyzed by design to not just let a space or a place do what it needs to do, to let folks interact with it and engage with it in a way that isn't too prescriptive.
Yeah.
It's
You
too
know,
much sometimes.
Go ahead.
No, it's, in our recent design, we created white rooms, which are oxygen rooms for people to just sit there and just like breathe the air, and also black rooms where you can actually just like sit in a very dark room and just kind of cleanse yourself and like just like decompress, because like it's too many stimuli to make it have a better production. How to bring people culture, this meeting room, that it's like it's too much for people. Like, you know, like before you have a big meeting, sometimes you need to decompress in that room. So I think these like just like neutral rooms, you can call it whatever you want to do, or whether it's room or not, but like we're creating these black rooms where you just sit there and decompress, have time for yourself, just like stop for a second without
I
thinking.
love that idea. You know, Katy, I think that I'm going to break one of my rules as moderator here and jump in and share some thoughts on this notion of like the design having to do too much. I think that for many, many years, we've allowed design to carry lots of air of finality and completeness that doesn't serve anyone. You know, this notion that you better get it right and it better be perfect because we've only got one shot. And I think that that's a dynamic that is really detrimental. And so I think asking this question of, we know we want and need to engage people, not only the people who are using the space, but also these other areas of expertise that could inform the space. But how do we modulate that engagement to an appropriate level for what needs to be done? We're quickly closing in on the top of the hour, and Michelle Thomas put a really interesting question in the chat, and I would love to see if any of y'all have thoughts on this. But this notion of how can small businesses absorb these expenses? And I'm assuming those are expenses for additional design time, consultation, things along those lines, when clients have tight budgets for just the project design fee. Any thoughts that come to mind for you around how we can elevate the nuance in design? Alexis, yeah, jump in, please.
Yeah, I was actually going to answer in the chat, but I thought I'll try to make it short. So to me, even because I've had clients where they would love to do more strategic kind of approach in the beginning, but they can't afford to, or you know their project or the project could really benefit from having those conversations, but you know we're limited on fees. But to me, if you can at least start with at the beginning of the project, to me, explore with the client, have the conversation why this is important, why creating this project or this place is important to them. What are they trying to achieve? To go beyond just, well, I need to fit 200 people, right? Have those dialogue in the beginning. So even without any other experts weighing in, I think it will put a different mindset to even the leaders of the organization or whoever they are embarking on a project, to put a slightly different purpose to that place that they're about to make. And I think that would just create so much more better opportunity for all of us to do better work. That's it.
Okay. So, all right, we've just heated up and we've got 2 minutes left to close out the call. So I think we should go ahead and start making our transitions to close. But I did want to say thank you very much to Alexis Kim, Edin Rudić, Aaron Wong, and Katy Mercer, both for joining us as part of the 2024 Leader to Leader cohort, but also here live to share some of their thinking with you today. Thank you for everyone who joined us online, and especially those who engaged in the chat. We really appreciated it. You should keep an eye out. And Jennifer, please jump in if you have more details here than I. We do have a full report on the Leader to Leader event that breaks out these themes in detail, along with some of the additional concepts and ideas that were mentioned, but maybe not fully unpacked here today. Jennifer, anything else to add from your side before we close down?
This session will be recorded, and we record all of our sessions, so you will be able to come back and engage here. You can continue to add some thoughts here into the chat, and we can distribute them out to our participants. And if you want to contact directly, you're free to do that as well to engage in more dialogue. And maybe we need part 2. I do feel like we just got heated up as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate you joining and sharing some of your time with us today.
Thank you for
Thank you,
organizing.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.